I never imagined I'd be chasing down my own HOA president in a Coast Guard operation. But there she was, 5 miles offshore, champagne glass raised, laughing with her friends as she drove my stolen boat across federal waters. She had no idea who she'd just messed with. And when those Coast Guard lights started flashing, the look on her face made every second of her harassment worth it. But let me back up, because this story starts 2 days earlier, when Patricia Thornwell made the biggest mistake of her life. The marina was quiet that Saturday morning, the kind of peaceful that made me fall in love with living in Lakeside Heights in the first place. I stood on my deck, coffee in hand, watching the mist rise off the water. My 24-foot Sea Ray bobbed gently at the dock, her white hull gleaming in the early light. I'd saved for 3 years to buy that boat, and she was my pride and joy. What I didn't know was that my morning peace was about to be shattered by Patricia Thornwell, the HOA president who'd made it her personal mission to make my life miserable since I'd moved in 6 months ago. It started with a knock on my door around 9 a.m. I opened it to find Patricia standing there, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair not moving an inch in the breeze, her lips pressed into that tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Marcus," she said, my name sounding like an accusation. "I need to discuss your boat." I kept my voice level and asked what about it. I'd learned that showing any emotion around Patricia was like blood in the water. She informed me that the HOA had reviewed the community bylaws and they'd determined that my vessel exceeded the maximum length allowed for private docks. According to her, I needed to remove it by the end of the month. I felt my jaw tighten as I explained that I had the boat inspected and approved before I moved in, and I had all the paperwork to prove it. But Patricia just waved her hand dismissively and interrupted me, claiming the rules had changed. She said new bylaws were passed last month, and I would know this if I attended their meetings. I told her I was on duty during those meetings because I'm in the Coast Guard and can't always make evening meetings. Her eyes narrowed, and she called it convenient, but insisted regardless the boat must go. She claimed it was an eyesore, and several neighbors had complained. By neighbors, she meant herself. Everyone else in the community had been nothing but friendly about the boat. Old Mr. Chen next door had even asked if I'd take him fishing sometime. I told Patricia carefully that I'd review the bylaws, and if there'd been a legitimate change, I'd address it through proper channels. Her smile turned predatory as she told me to do that, but emphasized the boat needed to be gone by month's end. She considered this my official warning. She turned on her heel and left, and I closed the door, leaning against it. Something about this felt wrong. Patricia had been trying to find violations against me since day one, but this felt different, more targeted. I spent the afternoon on duty, running a routine patrol, but my mind kept drifting back to Patricia's visit. When I got home that evening, I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop and read through every page twice. There was no new rule about boat length. In fact, boats up to 30 feet were explicitly allowed. Patricia had lied straight to my face. The next morning, Sunday, I decided to take the boat out early to clear my head and figure out my next move. I grabbed my keys and headed down to the dock around 7 a.m. That's when my world stopped. The boat was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty slip, my heart pounding in my chest. The dock lines were still there, neatly coiled, but my Sea Ray had vanished into thin air. I immediately called the police, reporting it stolen, then called the Coast Guard station. My commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, answered and told me to calm down. She assured me they'd help me track it down. Then she asked if I had the GPS tracker installed. Relief flooded through me as I confirmed I did. I'd installed a marine GPS system specifically for situations like this, though I'd imagined regular thieves, not HOA presidents. I opened the tracking app on my phone, and there it was. My boat was moving, currently about 5 miles offshore, making about 20 knots. I gave Sarah the coordinates, and she told me to sit tight while she sent a unit my way. They'd intercept whoever had stolen my boat. But I couldn't just sit tight. This was personal. I ran next door and asked Mr. Chen if I could borrow his smaller boat. The old man took one look at my face and handed me the keys without question. Within minutes, I was on the water following that GPS signal, the morning sun burning off the mist as I pushed the throttle forward. 20 minutes later, I spotted her. My beautiful Sea Ray, cutting through the water with 4 people aboard, music blasting across the peaceful morning. And there, at the helm in a designer swimsuit and oversized sunglasses, champagne glass in hand, was Patricia Thornwell. She was throwing her head back, laughing with her friends, one hand on my boat's wheel like she owned it, living her best life on my stolen property. The rage that surged through me was unlike anything I'd felt before. She hadn't just stolen my boat. She'd stolen it to party with her friends, to show off, to prove some twisted point about her power over me. My radio crackled to life. This is Coast Guard Cutter 47201. We have visual on the vessel. Marcus, are you on scene? I grabbed the radio, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through my veins. Affirmative. That's my boat, and that's my HOA president driving it. There was a brief pause, then Sarah's voice came back with barely concealed disbelief. Your HOA president stole your boat? I confirmed it, and I could almost hear her shaking her head. What happened next was the most satisfying moment of my entire life, and I knew I'd replay it in my mind for years to come. The Coast Guard cutter pulled alongside Patricia's stolen joyride, lights flashing, horn blaring its authority across the water. Patricia looked over, her carefree smile fading as she registered the official vessel bearing down on her position. Then she saw me in Mr. Chen's boat, and her face went completely white. All the color drained from her perfectly made-up features as reality crashed down on her champagne-soaked morning. Sarah's voice boomed over the loudspeaker with official authority. This is the United States Coast Guard. Cut your engines immediately and prepare to be boarded. Patricia fumbled with the controls, nearly dropping her champagne glass, her hands shaking. Her friends, 3 other women I recognized from HOA meetings, looked confused and frightened, their party atmosphere evaporating instantly. The boarding was textbook professional. Sarah and 2 other officers climbed onto my boat while I watched from nearby my borrowed vessel bobbing in the gentle waves. Patricia tried desperately to explain herself, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. There must be some mistake. This is community property. I'm the HOA president. I have the authority to... But Sarah cut her off with ice-cold professionalism. Ma'am, this vessel is registered to Marcus Thompson. Do you have his permission to operate this boat? Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Well, the HOA has the authority to. Sarah repeated her question. Slower this time. That's not what I asked. Do you have the owner's permission? Patricia's friends had gone completely silent, clutching their champagne glasses like lifelines, their eyes wide with dawning horror. Sarah's voice remained professional, but firm. Ma'am, you're currently operating a stolen vessel in federal waters. That's a federal crime. I need you to step away from the controls. The color that had returned to Patricia's face drained away again, leaving her looking almost gray. Stolen? Patricia's voice cracked. No, you don't understand. There are rules, bylaws. I was just teaching him a lesson about. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I pulled Mr. Chen's boat closer and called out, my voice carrying clearly across the water. You were just committing grand theft. And by the way, Patricia, I checked those bylaws you mentioned. There is no new rule about boat length. You made it up. Her eyes locked on mine, and I saw something break in her expression. Panic, maybe, or the realization that she'd gone too far this time, that her need for control had finally led her somewhere she couldn't manipulate her way out of. Sarah looked at me, her expression serious. Do you want to press charges? I thought about it for a long moment, watching Patricia standing there in her expensive swimsuit, surrounded by her terrified friends, her perfectly constructed world crumbling around her like a sandcastle at high tide. Part of me wanted to throw the book at her, to make her pay for every petty violation she'd invented, every threat she'd made, every moment she'd tried to make my life miserable. But another part of me just wanted peace, wanted this to be over. Then I remembered her face at my door, that predatory smile. The way she'd lied without hesitation. Yes, I said finally, my voice clear and certain. Full charges. Theft, operating a vessel without permission, trespassing. All of it. Patricia's face crumpled like paper. Please, this will ruin me. My reputation, my position, I cut her off quietly. You should have thought about that before you stole my boat. The words hung in the air between us, final and unforgiving. The Coast Guard escorted my boat back to the marina, with Patricia and her friends aboard under watchful eyes, while I followed in Mr. Chen's boat. By the time we docked, half the neighborhood had gathered at the marina, watching as Patricia was helped off my boat by Coast Guard officers. The police were waiting on the dock, their patrol car's lights adding to the spectacle. They arrested her right there, reading her rights while her friends scattered like frightened birds, desperate to distance themselves from the disaster. I watched as Patricia was placed in the back of the patrol car, her perfect hair finally coming undone, mascara running down her face in dark streaks. Mr. Chen stood beside me, shaking his head slowly. "That woman," he muttered. "Always thought she was above the rules. Guess she found out different today." The crowd of neighbors whispered among themselves, phones out, capturing every moment of Patricia's downfall. The legal process took weeks to unfold. Patricia was charged with grand theft and several boating violations. Her expensive lawyer tried to argue HOA authority, some twisted interpretation of community bylaws, but it fell apart quickly under scrutiny. You can't just take someone's property because you're on a homeowner's board. She resigned from the HOA in disgrace, and eventually, she and her husband sold their house and moved away from Lakeside Heights. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that her husband was furious, that her actions had cost them friends, reputation, and a significant amount in legal fees and the forced sale of their home. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named Gloria Martinez, called me about a week after Patricia left. "Marcus, on behalf of the community, I want to apologize for everything you went through," she said warmly. "We've reviewed all of Patricia's violations against you. Every single one was either fabricated or a gross exaggeration of minor issues. Your grass length was fine, your mailbox met all specifications. Everything. She was targeting you personally. I thanked her for looking into it. Then Gloria surprised me. Also, we'd like to invite you to join the HOA board. We need people with actual integrity, people who understand what community really means." I laughed. Let me think about that one. Now, when I sit on my deck in the mornings watching the sun rise over the water, my coffee steaming in the cool air, I think about that day, about how Patricia's need for control and her personal vendetta led her to make the stupidest decision of her life. She didn't know I was with the Coast Guard. She didn't know my boat had GPS tracking. She didn't know that federal waters meant federal crimes with serious consequences. But most of all, she didn't know that some people can't be bullied into submission, can't be intimidated by petty power plays and manufactured violations. My Sea Ray still sits at my dock, right where she belongs, gleaming in the morning light. And every time I take her out on the water, I smile, remembering the look on Patricia's face when those Coast Guard lights started flashing. Some lessons are expensive. Patricia's lesson cost her everything, but it taught the whole community something valuable. Power without integrity is just tyranny waiting to collapse. And sometimes, karma comes with flashing lights and federal charges.